It's April 15th, 2021. This is Roqe. As a teenager, she was recruited to do translation and guidance for the New York Times in Iran. Since then, she's turned that early experience into an impressive international broadcasting career, including the last 2 decades at the BBC. Pooneh Ghoddoosi is a television anchor, radio presenter, and senior producer who has become a familiar face on BBC Persian and BBC World. She has been at the top of her game, anchoring in both English and Persian, as well as reporting from crisis zones, and now she's stepped into a major business role with the BBC World Service. Pooneh Ghoddoosi joins me for a feature interview today, plus another edition of It's All Persian to Us and more. I'm Jian Ghomeshi. This is Roqe. Hi there, welcome to episode number 102 of Roqe. Welcome to those of you tuning in from around the world, our Australian friends, those in Germany, in Iran, the United States, all across Canada. Hello to you from Toronto. Khosh omadin, durud bar shoma, mukhlesim, yo. Nice to have you with us. Hello, fabulous Kyan.
Hi, Jian.
We are on an ongoing mission, Kyan.
Yes, I believe we are.
To build a new audiovisual encyclopedia of Iranian diaspora identity, coming to you on Spotify, on SoundCloud, Instagram, YouTube, iTunes, CastBox, Telegram. If you'd like to see some visuals with your Roqe, switch over to YouTube right now. And if you like your Roqe descriptions and bulletins in English and Persian, check us out on Telegram. Lots of options for you, Kyan.
We have it all.
That's right. Or a few options.
Well,
anyway.
Yes, all of the required options.
Hello, Captain Reza.
Hello, sir.
And hello, Groovy Shaya.
Hi, yes.
Pooneh Ghoddoosi coming up in just a little bit. I'm very happy to have her coming on the show. You know, I said this, I think, on our Monday program, but I think she's one of the few people in the world, one of the few broadcasters, anchors who has been at the top of her game, at the top of the world game, you know, both in Persian with BBC Persian and in English with BBC World, where she's anchored to, you know, an audience of 400, 500 million people. She's a great broadcaster. She's done this for many years, and now she's moving into the business side of BBC as well. Not bad for a kid from Iran.
It's pretty impressive to be able to switch from English to Persian. It's me and you will never have that talent.
Well, don't include me.
well, I mean, you especially.
Dystopian visions. No, I think, but you're right. No, it's very impressive. She, at the age, I mean, as the story goes, and people who know Pooneh might know this part of her story, which is that she's a kid in Iran, and she randomly, I mean, happens to get called to be a fixer, to be a translator and helper and a guide at the age of 18 for publications like the New York Times and the Wall Street Journal, and that parlays into a media career.
But crazy
yeah,
story.
I mean, she's good at what she does, and she's got she'll no doubt have a lot of interesting perspectives about broadcasting, so we'll get to that. I have to announce before that, though, it is the 1-year anniversary of Roqe.
Yes.
I thought you were going to play some music, Shaya. Like
I thought you would have written
I'm so boring. So.
Why have you become... it's our 1-year anniversary tomorrow. Tomorrow is we launched 1 year ago. Tomorrow, April 16th, 2020 was when we launched.
Wow.
I mean, it's, you know, Captain Reza was just a fresh-faced teenager when we started last year, so sweet and innocent. Now he looks like Mullah.
Taliban?
He looks like Mullah Omar from the Taliban. A grizzled man in his 50s who's combing his beard. Yeah,
Don't you dare comment
you
on
remember
me.
Mullah Omar? He would come out for the press conference. I think he wore a patch as well. Groovy Shia also feeling the effects of 1 year at Roqe. You know, he was a handsome young hipster musician. Now he looks like a fishmonger. You know, he's working at the wharf.
It's because he's wearing a woolly
cap. Do you like some pickerel or some salmon?
Shia, he says you look like one of those people that works at the fish market.
You know, like a fish. No, you're on the wharf. You're at the wharf, and where the water is, and you bring in the fish. You know, you've got a cable net sweater, and it's actually a very noble profession. Listen, a lot cooler than a musician.
Yeah.
And Kyan Jun, you just keep getting better. That's what I was going to say.
Wow, I'm
you
shocked.
Just keep getting better.
So you're going to say kami topoli shodi or
no, that's not. No. Listen, I'm proud of everybody. What a great team. We started this with on a hunch about exploring the connective tissue of Iranians around the diaspora, and it's been such an interesting year of learning and growing and talking to some incredible people and trying to discover our identity, our issues, explore and celebrate a lot of what makes us Iranian and the amazing people doing things around the world, but also contend with a lot of the issues or challenges that we also face. So very proud of us and proud of you guys, especially fishmongers and mullahs and all of you.
Might I add, this all started in the middle of a pandemic.
It did, and it continues in the middle of a pandemic. As we, Thoughtful Negin. Shout out to Thoughtful Negin. By the way, the thanks go to our whole crew who's been so great this year. We've got a team it's like a little family, you know. And Thoughtful Negin, of course, is part of that team. She arrived. She dropped off some food today. You know, let me tell you something, Captain Reza. There comes a time in a man's life when he realizes what true love is.
That's true.
And that is tachin with qeymeh inside of it.
Mamma mia.
Did you try some of that?
Of course I did.
Yeah.
You kidding me? Mouth what?
Shai, can you show Captain Reza where the microphone
yes,
is? It's only been a year. He needs a couple of years.
Sleeping.
No, I did try it, and it was delicious. She brought 3 different ones with qeymeh, bagali polo, tachin with bagali polo.
Little tachin
inside
cakes.
of it is like.
Kian, you didn't have any, did you?
I had a little bit.
No, you didn't.
I actually
Regime
did. I was
gerefti
trying to resist, and I couldn't. I saw that qeymeh stuffed inside
so good.
a tarchin. I was like,
Listen, get it while you can, because Shia, the vacuum cleaner, who never gets fat. The rest of us are all like trying to work out, and he just.
I hate that fishmonger right there.
The fishmonger working on the wharf. Poor fishmongers. Yeah. I don't know if they're listening, but listen. And the other thing is, so Thoughtful Negin, and then now we've had the privilege here of some people over the last year. There was people have dropped off art, people have dropped off little gifts. And a couple of times we've had food or, goodies dropped off. So there's a cake out there that is, I don't even want to touch it because it's the coolest thing I've ever seen. It's like it's got a radio microphone and headphones. Did you not see it yet, Shana?
No.
Captain Reza, explain what this is.
It looks incredible. It looks like if you show that cake to somebody, they'd be like, oh, is this for a podcast? Like that's how incredible.
It's beautiful. It says and it's got Farsi and English on it, and it's got explanations of what we do.
Good.
And we're gonna we have to post it.
100%.
It'll probably be posted by the time you guys are hearing this. But it's this cake. There's a bakery in Aurora, Ontario. So those of you who know where we live in Canada, in the Toronto area, but an hour north of Toronto is a place called Aurora. There's a place called Arnica Bakery. A woman named Mariam, Arnica Bakery, who is a fan of the show and made this 1 year anniversary cake.
That's so sweet.
It is sweet.
Literally sweet.
I haven't had it yet, but I mean, we are inviting sponsors for Roqe now, but apparently you can just give us food and I'll talk about you. I'll talk about you at the top of the show. Just people have figured it out. See, we can either sponsor them or give them a cake, and then they'll just talk about how great I am. No, but listen, Mariam John, Arnica Bakery, I guess you can order from them. I went on their Instagram, and there's a lot of different kinds of cakes and stuff. But wow, it is just beautiful, and I'm sure it's delicious. We haven't ruined it yet by.
Shia, don't touch it.
Anyway, 1 year anniversary. Congratulations to the and obviously the biggest thanks goes to those of you out there who've been. Tuning in and supporting us and subscribing. I mean, I remember when we started and our Instagram account had like 30 followers, and I was almost embarrassed.
Of them were
we were like embarrassed to tell the guests coming on, like, oh, we've got an Instagram, because they would go to it and go, these guys have 30 followers, and 30 of them were like my mom and
her friends,
Catherine Reza's girlfriend, and so now we have 35. No, it's 800,000 streams and 11,000 subscribers, and we're just building this thing. And again, if you folks out there really do want to support us, you can become a patron at roqemedia.com. Anyway, enough nonsense. I wanted to say, I thought we'd have music or some kind of tashrifat, but I see how patronizing they are. You say one word, آفرین ببین رضا جان چی گفته این
فارسی
بچه داره فارسی حرف میزنه.
میتونیم مسخرش کنیم دیگه.
How do you know tashrifat?
How do I not know tashrifat? I don't
know tashrifat.
I've never used that word.
What is that word?
Listen, we've got some great guests coming up in the next couple of weeks.
Yeah.
Our 1 year anniversary of Roqe. We're going to keep this thing going. Obviously, Pooneh coming up in a few moments from London, England. Monday, Professor Richard Foltz, whose area of study is Iranian history, but particularly I want to talk to him about Iran and Iranians before Islam. Who were we before 1,400 years ago? I'm very much actually I've been reading his books and looking forward to this interview. So Richard Foltz coming up, and Persian yoga, a guy by the name of Kashi Azad, but he goes by Persian yoga. He's in Australia. He's got quite an online presence. He does what he calls Persian yoga, which basically is old school Persian fitness in the Zurkhune. Have you ever heard of a Zurkhune?
Yeah, the kushti, the big guys that do the...
Not kushti,
no?
though. They swing this bat club-like thing.
Right.
You know what that is? You seen that?
And it's done in like some kind of sauna room or
Well,
something?
it's called a Zurkhune, but it's not really a sauna room.
It looks like a Turkish bath.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And it's a bunch of men that do it.
It is a bunch of men, although now it is, there's a Zurkhune, I think, in north of Toronto where they've made it co-ed. And this guy, Kashi Azad, I mean, I'll ask him about it, but he's inviting women into the Zurkhune as well. It used to be a male sort of
strength
traditional stereotype warrior type thing, but anyway, he calls it Persian yoga. And so we'll talk to him in Australia. Peter Banifaz, if you have you been following him?
I cannot wait for him.
He's very funny.
I love that guy.
He's very funny. Looking forward to having him. Shirin Nasiri, who's also quite a personality and a broadcaster herself. Bahman Qobadi. Now, this guy, he is he's certainly one of my favorite filmmakers in the world. I'm so honored that doesn't do very many interviews. In fact, I don't think he's done an interview for years, a serious one. And he's the guy who in the year 2000 he basically made the first feature film about Kurds, or shot in Kurdistan, called A Time for Drunken Horses. And that launched his career, and an award-winning career of films. Although lately he has been spending less time making films and more time on the ground in places like Erbil, teaching kids, teaching young people film, teaching young Kurds. He's a really interesting guy, a very talented filmmaker, and he's kind of coveted by these people around the world, like Martin Scorsese. sort of adopted Pooneh Ghoddoosi and is helping to produce one of his films now and is his buddy, and he's been shooting things with Roger Waters. I mean, there's a lot of things we're going to get into with Pooneh Ghoddoosi, but he's coming up on the show in the coming days. And Piaz Miaz, who is a fabulous young chef and social media presence as well. Looking forward to having him on the program. On Monday we had Farzana Milani, Dr. Farzana Milani, and on the program, and she was talking about how it was only when she left Iran that she really found who she is as an Iranian. I left Iran to become an Iranian was the way she talked about it. She also talked about how she sees her home in a bicultural way. She both identifies as American, where she lives now, and Iranian. Tomorrow on Clubhouse, inspired by that and a lot of the conversations we have, 4 p.m. Eastern time tomorrow, we're going to do our weekly Roqe Town Hall. Where do we identify as home? Where do we identify? And I mentioned it on Monday. The other thing that Farzana Milani said was she was talking about Farrokh Farrokhzad, and she was talking about how Farrokh Farrokhzad always felt like an outsider in Iran. Never left Iran, but never really felt like Iran was home. This person who's become an icon now of Iranian poetry and female literature and strength. And so lots to explore with this topic. Off the top of your head, Reza,
Yep.
where would you, tomorrow on Clubhouse, when I say, where do we identify as home, what do you say?
Be honest, truth be told, Toronto.
You identify Toronto as your home.
Yeah, I always said that. I'm Iranian by birth, Canadian by choice, and I'm proud of it. I'm very proud of it. I'm proud of it because I consider.
There's a wake up.
Yeah, dude, we can barely even hear this guy.
What?
Where do you identify as home? I would say Toronto.
Are you even alive right now?
Somebody get him an injection. Can we get you the vaccine? Will that wake you up?
It's the Tachin.
What?
I need
Jesus.
a B12 shot now.
I'm sorry I asked you. Kyan joined. Well, we'll talk about it tomorrow on Clubhouse. We'll do it tomorrow on
stay tuned.
Clubhouse. All right. By the way, it's All Persian to Us coming up, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
That's
Do
all.
you want to
I'm
give us
gonna
any
say.
hints?
I don't know how to without giving it away. It can be a form of art.
All right.
Yes.
A form of art that Persians invented.
Yes.
All right.
That's done outdoors.
That could be a lot of things. Oh, that's done outdoors.
Yeah.
It can be a form of art, you said.
It's seen as a form of art.
It's seen as a
Yes.
form of
All
art.
right. A new edition of It's All Persian to Us coming up in about an hour. Captain Reza, get some sleep. Groovy Shaya, the fabulous Kyan. We'll see you all in a little bit. Let's get to our feature guest. My guest today is a world-renowned television anchor, radio presenter, output editor, and senior producer who has worked with a variety of news, current affairs, features, and interactive programs for BBC. She is the business development manager for global partnerships at the BBC World Service and one of BBC's select group of multilingual presenters. Pooneh Ghoddoosi started her career in journalism in 1990 in her birthplace, Iran, working for the New York Times and the Wall Street Journal, and has freelanced for a great number of international media outlets since then, including the Washington Post, the Toronto Star, the Daily Telegraph, the Financial Times, NPR, and PBS. Over more than 2 decades with the BBC, she has edited, produced, and presented programs on BBC World News, BBC Persian Television, and the BBC World Service Radio. She was the host of the award-winning interactive program Nobat Shoma, Your Turn, on BBC Television, Persian Television, for 4 years. Pooneh is also a BBC senior media trainer, helping educate the next generation of journalists and presenters on editorial and legal guidelines, interviewing skills, social media verification, digital and mobile journalism, and editorial leadership. Pooneh speaks English, Persian, French, and understands Arabic, Italian, Portuguese, and German. She is one of those rare folks who has been at the top of the game as an anchor in both Farsi with BBC Persian and English with BBC World. And right now, Pooneh Ghoddoosi joins me from London, England today. Hello.
I'm humbled. That was the longest introduction anyone has ever given me.
You're exhausted.
I'm one of the sweetest.
You're exhausted. Well, you deserve it.
Thank you. That's like my career in a whole paragraph.
By the way, I mean, I can't help that you speak 100 languages. I had to go through the whole list. If you just limit it to English and Persian, it would have been a lot easier.
No. I speak a little bit of everything and a lot or enough of nothing, including Persian and Farsi, because my brain is a bit mixed up with all the languages. I don't know what language I dream in, what language I curse in, which is obviously supposed to be the main tests of a language speaker. But I'm a little bit of everything and actually nothing.
Well, certainly not nothing. You really are international, though. You're an international human, and I'll get into that. Maybe that'll form the subtext of this interview, because you're who you are.
I'm a global nomad for sure.
You're global. That's for let me start here. There's a sense with some people that they are in a field that they're destined to be in, and that's the way I feel when I watch you or listen to you broadcast. You're not just world class in various languages, but you are comfortable in your own skin. And I always tell young journalists that the magic of broadcasting is to make the audience feel comfortable with you so that they will believe you and feel comfortable themselves and want to watch or listen. Do you believe that's true?
That's a very sweet thing to say. I think the superpower of anyone who wants to get into this business is to be able to comfortably open up, genuinely open up, show interest in people, genuinely again, and allow people to open up back to them. And anyone who can do that would be great at this business. You don't have to study journalism or international relations or politics for 20 years, but it helps. But yes, there is that human contact aspect of things.
And how do you genuinely open up?
I have no shame, one. I have nothing to hide, two. I don't know, I'm generally curious. I was a fuzul child, a nosy child as a kid. I was always told, don't do this, don't go there, it's too early for you, too dangerous for you. And naturally, whenever they told me, don't put your finger in that electricity plug, that was exactly what I was heading for. And I think that curiosity or genuine intrigue in what's going on in the world with the people just got me into this. I never thought I would grow up and be a journalist at all. I probably didn't know what a journalist was when I was 10 or 15 even. I sort of dived into it in a roulette kind of a way or in a runaway train kind of a way, that someone just switches the line before you really know it and you're in another career course or country course or life course. And I love that.
Hang on, let me get to the runaway train and the roulette, because that I definitely want to talk about that. But 2 steps back, when you were just talking about, I don't think it's only about opening yourself up, because especially in this moment in the 21st century, where social media and Instagram stars, and it is so much about just opening up oneself. I think you have to add to that, and you did then, the curiosity element and the willingness to listen. Would you agree with that?
Yes, absolutely. I think people on social media, or a lot of people right now, confuse putting yourself out there for self-promotion with putting yourself out there because of interest in life and its people and the world. And I think having genuine interest in other people is what makes you really good in this business. Not having an interest in promoting yourself, showing how clever you are, how great your research is, how prepared you are for the interview. A lot of interviewees end up asking questions that are longer than the answers of the interviewee, which is a bit to say, see how much I know about this, how much I've researched about that, how well I know this, how well I know the world, how I can guess what's going to happen next. So what do you leave for the poor person to tell you?
Yes.
I think the truth is to seek the truth, not to try to show off that you know it. And as you know, social media is full of accounts who are just there because they want to talk about themselves. But a real journalist should really not be a player in the game themselves. I always, when I used to train newcomer journalists, in my training courses at the BBC, I always say one of the first things I do in the first session is say, remember, this is not a tennis match. You're not an equal player in an equal game on the same court.
Right.
This is like a squash match. You're the wall back there. They're supposed to bounce their ideas and their discussions and their opinions off on you.
Yeah.
You're supposed to just bounce it back and reflect on these, but you're not supposed to take a racket and join the game as if you're part of the game yourself. And I think it's sort of pulling yourself out of the story, allowing the story to develop without you being a star in it, allowing the other person or the actual story to be the star in it.
You know, it's gratifying to hear you say that. And not to go too far into this rabbit hole before, because I do want to make it about your story, but it makes me sad that so much of so-called journalism or interviewing or broadcasting, especially when it comes to television these days and television news, has been equated with good journalism, has been equated with ambushing the guest with some ammunition that you're going to expose them ideologically with or something. And I don't know
making them look like an idiot, and you win.
I think it's partly a byproduct of the Trump era and just the nature of the world in general, where everything's become so Manichaean. You're either a good guy or a bad guy, and so if you bring somebody on from the other side, you have to attack them. But that's not what I've ever seen in interviewing to be, that the idea that you bring somebody on and yell at them and prove that they're a bad person, or that, you know, that they've got the wrong prescription.
It's not confrontation for the sake of confrontation. I know many channels thrive on that and their audiences love it. They're just there for the punch up. It's like watching WWF more than watching the news or watching a discussion program. Right. But to me, it's not really about that.
And yet, I'm sure you've had the experience. I mean, not that you don't, of course, you should ask the responsible questions and hold people to account to a certain extent. But I'm sure you've had had this happen to you either at BBC World or certainly BBC Persian, where you would bring somebody on and the audience, some audience who disagrees with that person, will be angry at you for simply not yelling at them for half an hour. And you sort of go, well, my job is to extract who this person is and what they believe, and for you to decide what you think, not for me to yell at them.
Absolutely. My job is to expose this person and what they believe in, and expose their ideas and expose what's going on in the world. It's your job to make up your mind about whether you like it, whether you approve of it, whether you agree with it or not. It's not my job to tell you, hello, this is good, this is bad, do this, don't do that. And I think, again, a lot of, I don't want to sound preachy, like we know at the BBC how to do things and no one else does. It's really not the case.
Here we go.
Everyone can improve. We can all improve, all of us together as a media family. But I think the secret is just to let people see the facts, open them up, shred them into pieces, let them understand it, and then let them decide what their judgment is going to be about it, and not take sides and allow people to take their own sides.
Yeah, I mean, I guess there's an expectation at this point that from certain people certain folks in the audience, and maybe because they've been sort of taught this in terms of the way some broadcasters operate, that your job is to take a side. But
a lot of people want a lot more from you.
Yeah,
they want you to bang on someone's head and hang someone from a rope in your studio if you can. But they can do that themselves. They don't really need us for that.
Yeah. Well, and then there's the question of platforming. I can't believe you brought John Bolton on and didn't say this to him, right? Sometimes there is a legitimate point to be made about, putting the person, holding them to account for something they've done or said, or asking the questions. But the expectation that it has to be some kind of a battle because you disagree with the guest is a straight. I have to feel that that's a product of the newer era. I have to feel that, that's not Walter Cronkite journalism. That's something else.
No, I think class and elegance and genuine interest is something that we shouldn't forget and shouldn't lose sight of. And just being flashy and having the most gorgeous studios and having the most gorgeous outfits, but not having done your research well enough to be able to help the audience understand what really is going on in that person's head, is the bit that we sometimes miss. And all of us miss it. I mean, you're right. I've done a million interviews with some really big people, and I've finished the interview and gone, damn, I should have asked this and this and this. Like every time you have a fight with someone, when it's over, you think, I should have said this and that more.
Right.
But that's how it is. Nobody's perfect. And we're all doing this spontaneously. However much you research, however number of questions you plan to ask someone, in the middle of the conversation, another question is going to come up and the road is going to go a different way and you're going to be diverted into a different subject, which you may not have fully prepared for or fully planned for. And I think that is beautiful and that is great, but spontaneity has its side effects as well.
It's so interesting to me a few months ago that you said that this wasn't the plan for you to get into broadcasting or to get into media or to get into journalism, because it feels like it was destiny. I mean, with you, the story is actualized by your teens when you're working for the New York Times and the Wall Street Journal as a fixer and a reporter in Iran. You know, most journalists would work a lifetime and not get a gig at the New York Times. How did this happen to a young woman, a girl in Iran?
It's funny you should say that, because recently, I don't know, somewhere I posted a story about, it was the anniversary of the earthquake, Rudbar Manjil earthquake in Iran in 1990, when I suddenly got drawn into this business. And I posted something saying I was only 18, I arrived at the earthquake zone, working for the New York Times. And immediately a bunch of people, I assume trolls only, said, oh, you must have had connections or it was nepotism. What 18-year-old becomes a journalist with the New York Times? How much did you pay, or who did you sleep with? Or this is impossible. Your story is unbelievable. It is in a way a little bit unbelievable. But I was in the first year of university in Iran. I spoke good enough English already because I did since I was a child. But I had a French teacher, an adorable lady, a French lady in Iran who taught French at her home. She called me and she said a bunch of foreign journalists have arrived in Iran. It was the first time they allowed a bunch of foreign journalists to come in because they wanted to get foreign aid into the country since the revolution. So 5 or 6 foreign journalists were allowed to arrive to go to the earthquake zone. She put me in touch with people from the New York Times and the Wall Street Journal. I borrowed my mother's high heels and her silk scarf and her handbag to look a little bit more grown up because I was in torn jeans and Doc Martens at that age. I arrived in some hotel lobby, talked to these people. They said, we need to head to the earthquake zone in 3 hours. We've just arrived. And this is a day after the most devastating earthquake in Iran. And my first answer was, excuse me, I have to go home and ask permission from my parents to go with you. This is before mobile phones and everything. So yes, I was a kid. I was totally unprepared for this, besides the fact that I spoke fluent English, which was the only asset that was helpful at that time. I ended up going home, packing up my toothbrush and backpack and getting onto a Red Crescent helicopter and arriving onto an earthquake zone that was, most horrible than any horrible Hollywood movie you've ever seen. And standing there just frozen and shocked and horrified at what's going on around me. And I had no idea what to do. And I was supposed to run around and translate and interpret what was going on. So yes, I got thrown into the deep end of a pool within 5 hours notice, maybe.
Wow.
And it changed my life. And I'm grateful because exactly at the same time as I thought this is the most horrendous thing that could have ever happened to me, it was also one of the most thrilling experiences. And there and then I thought, this is it. This is it for me.
And how did your parents feel about you doing this?
They've always been super cool and supportive and probably as adventurous and well-traveled as I wanted to be. So that's always been great. But about maybe 20 years later, when the BAM earthquake happened, my father went to the earthquake zone with a delegation for his work about a year after the earthquake.
13 years later, 2003, I think it was, yeah.
Yes. I wasn't in Iran then anymore. I was working at the BBC in London. And he called me and he said, girl, how did you go to an earthquake zone when you were 18 and come back, and we had a chat about it, and it was, fine, we thought. I am devastated and horrified and really unwell a week or two after going to a place a year after the earthquake. How did you cope with this? We did not really understand what you went through or what was really happening to you at the time. And I didn't really. I mean, this was way before I understood what PTSD was.
That's actually one of my questions I want to come back to with you, because you are one of those people who's been at the front lines of a lot and a lot of difficulty and a lot of atrocities and a lot of horrible events. And so I do wonder how that, I think your dad's question was a sage one, and I'll put that to you in a little bit. But let me just stick with where we are in the story, because
you want to ask what countries I've been arrested in? How many countries?
I didn't know there was a list of arrested countries as well.
Question, yes.
You described a few minutes ago your nomadic and very international life as something of a roulette wheel adventure. So if I can get into the roulette wheel, let's just set the stage for people. You're born
Put your bet on. Let's go.
You're born in Iran, but you, as I understand it, had actually left the country with your family when the revolution happened in 1979. You were 7 years old when the revolution happened. And then your family...
We happened to be in the States when the revolution was happening. And then we went back to Iran afterwards.
So where my mind goes is this kid who's been in pre-revolution Iran returns with the family to the new Islamic Republic.
With a bit of an American accent.
With a bit of an American accent.
Big trouble in Iranian school for the first few years.
So what was that like for you?
It was strange. I didn't come from elite or, upper middle class family in Iran. My father and mother both worked in banks as regular employees, entry level, post university. We weren't connected to anywhere. They were really clever and kind to save their money as young parents and send me and my brother to international schools and English teachers since we were like 3-4. And that really has made all the difference. But yes, my dad worked in the States for a little while on an exchange program with the bank. And we happened to be in the States, for example, when the Cinema Rex situation, the big fire happened in the height of the protests before the revolution. And I remember we were in a hotel lobby coming from a dinner, and my parents suddenly froze in front of a TV screen watching the news about the fire in Iran, and I didn't quite understand what was going on, but I could see tear flowing down my mother's eyes, and I was going on like, what's happening? And it was images of the Cinema Rex fire in Iran. So yes, we went back to Iran after the revolution. I went to Iranian school with a little tiny scarf on my head as a 8-year-old, 9-year-old.
Right.
I had a bit of an accent, so the kids and the teachers made a little bit of fun of me for saying, for example, Christmas instead of Kirismas. But it was fine. I mean, I spoke Farsi well enough, and I'd already skipped a year. In between first grade and third grade, I didn't do second grade elementary, so I skipped a year. So I always felt a little bit left out or behind or away from the crowd that I was in. I was a year younger than everybody all throughout my school, high school, university.
By the time you're in university in Iran and you're set to come west, I'm always curious whether a person like you especially, whose career outside of Iran, related to Iran, has been so big and so public for the last 20 years, when you left Iran, and I know you ended up coming even to Canada for a stint, did you have a sense that that was going to be forever? I mean, were you saying goodbye to Iran, I'm now headed for the diaspora, or did it feel like maybe I'll go and do some education and then return somehow?
To be honest, I don't want to say I left and I thought I'm never going to look behind my back, because that's not the case. But there was a point that I had worked as a journalist in Iran with New York Times, Wall Street Journal, Toronto Star, Boston Globe, I don't know, Philadelphia Inquirer, and numerous newspapers. So I had already been working for 6-7 years as a stringer, as a fixer in Iran. I had been arrested and harassed and bothered so much, and it was so difficult doing what I really wanted to be doing. And also for my parents, who had the deeds to the house on top of the TV stand, ready to come and bail me out whenever I get arrested, because it was that much of a regular event.
Wow.
At some point, it came to this point of like, not just me, but everyone telling me, my mom said, you know, I'd love for you to stay in Iran and get married and live upstairs and have kids and stay here, but it's time for you to leave. This is not working for you. If you want to continue in this career, if this is what you want to be doing, this is not sustainable for you. And it really wasn't, because there was a point that, I mean, my file in Ershad and intelligence was already this big when I was in my early 20s. Which I take that as a compliment, but I don't know if they do.
Sorry, Pooneh, explain to folks out there what a fixer means, and then why you would be getting arrested for what is it that you were doing?
Okay, in 1990 when I started, I wasn't a journalist. I was a very low-level translator, interpreter / like a tour guide or a work guide for foreign journalists who came to Iran, who didn't know where to go, who to talk to, how to navigate the nuances of being in Iran, or, you know, going about without getting into trouble. And I was already quite a savvy little street smart girl, I think, for my age. I spoke the language, I spoke a bit of French, I spoke English already. I knew, you know, how to contact people, how to get interviews. I knew who to recommend. If they said, I'm looking for an underground musician, I'm looking for an artist, I'm looking for a filmmaker, I knew people to connect to them and tell them, suggest, interview this person or that person. So it's sort of the right-hand person for a journalist without being an actual journalist. You're like a glorified assistant / interpreter. And that's how I started. And then at some point when the journalists cannot come to Iran to cover a story, they will commission you to write an article or contribute to an article, which I did for several years. For some of those years, I actually worked under somebody else's name because I would get into serious trouble in Iran. And even for doing the stringer / fixer work, I had to go report myself to the Ministry of Islamic Culture and Guidance on a weekly basis, say who we plan to go and see, get a written permission, put my photograph on it, get a stamp, wear my chador, and, you know, take away my nail varnish and go sit there like a good girl and say, we promise to behave, please let us do this and do this. And at that time, there were really about 3 or 4 people who did that. So we were a very small pool, and all the foreign journalists of all of the outlets of all of the countries knew this 3-4 people to get in touch with through their own connections. When they came to Iran, they contacted one of us and ended up working with us for 2-3 weeks. So that's what a fixer really is. But then slowly, it sort of gradually develops into them giving their notebook to you and you actually doing the interviews because they don't really know what's going on. Some places it's so sensitive. I remember one of the coolest or first interviews I did was, do you know Daniel Pearl, the Wall Street journalist who,
of course,
was beheaded in Pakistan? He was a very close and good friend of mine and a colleague. We went to the shrine of Khomeini in Iran, and there were a young couple, a young postar and his very new wife sitting there praying, like tying knots to the shrine, making a wish for their married life to be blissful. And I ended up sitting with them and chatting with them for an hour and interviewing them about their problems and their life. And they really opened up to us. But it really wasn't a situation that I could translate every sentence back and forth, because I had gotten into this groove with them. And it would have made them really uncomfortable if I would have joined an American journalist in the conversation and made them, you know, claw back in and close up. So I ended up doing the whole interview, doing everything myself, and then telling Daniel about it later. Like, this is what they were saying, this is what I was asking.
Right.
So you sort of gradually become a journalist, but not officially until
For sure.
you go get a more developed job on it.
By the way, I mean, in my experience in media, going back to what you said at the beginning of this interview, I do believe in higher education. I believe people should go and learn as much as they can, and a liberal arts education I will always defend and promote. But I don't necessarily think you need to go to journalism school to be a great broadcaster or to be a great journalist. A lot of it is that experience in the field, is doing what you did. And I mean, unbeknownst to you, you're in the hot spots of that people travel around the world to get to, and you're already there.
Absolutely.
And you're
when I did go
out.
to journalism school, everybody said to me, "Are you stupid? You've been doing this for 8 years. Everybody comes here for 3-4 years dying to go out and get a job with the Wall Street Journal or the Daily Telegraph or the Guardian or whatever."
So this is interesting to me. You end up coming to, I mean, it's funny because you're clearly hardworking and you're clearly good at what you do from a young age. I mean, even at
Thank you.
Well, look, I mean, even at that stage, the New York Times doesn't keep hiring an 18-year-old unless they're doing a good job. So it's clear that you were doing it right. But it's also, you have this interesting, I mean, maybe this is what you mean by the roulette wheel, but this interesting trajectory where things just kind of happen with you. You come to Canada, you're doing university here in Toronto, and if I have the story straight, a friend of yours applies on your behalf, unbeknownst to you, for a job for you at BBC Persian, and you get the job and go to London. Is that right?
Very true. Yes. So yes, I finished my stint as a stringer fixer in Iran, decided to go to Toronto to properly study journalism as a postgrad. When I arrived in Canada, I decided this is a great place to live. Actually, I went there for 2 weeks initially to visit a friend, and I decided to stay. I enrolled in university. I got a job. I got a life. I got a boyfriend, a flat, friends, everything. After about 3 years, I was on a work trip in Syria, actually. I was in Damascus. And when I came back, an old friend of mine who's an editor and a book publisher in Iran called me and said, "I looked for you. I tried calling you." This is early days of email, by the way. You were really lucky if you had a laptop or a university email account. Hotmail was the only thing, or AOL.com.
Mid-90s, about?
Yes, 97, 98.
Yeah.
So he called me from Iran and said, "I saw this ad in The Economist magazine. I thought it's right up your alley. They're looking for a producer in BBC's Persian service in London. I couldn't find you, but because we'd worked together, I had one of your old resumes from a few years ago. So I'm sorry, I took the liberty and I sent it over to them. Now, if you want, you can follow it up. They may not even get in touch with you, but if they do, it's up to you. I'll leave it to you." And I thought, wow, my life was only beginning to become completely organized and relaxed and settled in Canada. I had decided this is what I'm going to do. This is my life. This is my job. Just about to finish university. And someone calls me and says, "Would you like to come to Turkey for a job interview with the BBC?" And the BBC, huge name. I'm like, yeah, actually, wait a second. I'm just settling in.
Wait, the job interview was in Turkey, not in London?
Yes. No, it wasn't in London because they got fresh applicants from Iran who would get into trouble if the Iranian government knew that they're applying for a job with the BBC. So they used to do job interviews in Cyprus or Dubai or Turkey or other places, and a group of people from a variety of places. I happened to go from Canada, but some people came from Iran. Some people came from other countries. You go there, you apply for the job, you get interviewed, you do a written test, a spoken test, etc. Job interview after job interview for a number of days, and then they tell you if you got the job.
And you got the job.
I got the job. And I was like, I've got a life that is just about to start properly with my residency permit and, my job and my flat. And I loved my life in Canada. And my friends in Toronto are still my closest and best group of my posse, are all there. And it was a very difficult decision to make. And again, it was like a train is passing you by in high speed and you suddenly decide to change track and you just sort of hang on to a handlebar on the side and get swept away with it.
And by the way, we don't call it flat here. We call it an apartment or a condo.
I used to say Toronto for 20 years. Now I say Toronto.
Yeah, very proper.
Sorry.
You're very proper now. I'm imagining that when you first moved to London and you're taking this gig with BBC Persian, it's a radio gig, you have no sense that you're going to spend more than 20 years at the BBC, right? This is just, let me go explore what this is.
No, one of the funniest things anyone ever told me was that I had worked for only English media for 7-8 years by then. And I had made, sort of a name for myself in that crowd. And I suddenly go to writing stories and delivering stories in Farsi, which I hadn't done and I wasn't really prepared for. I was very good at translating and, doing live interpretation online or on air, but I really didn't imagine myself as a presenter of programs in Farsi. I always thought my niche back in Iran was that I spoke English. But when you come to another country, you're just a regular other person who speaks English, probably not as nicely as everybody else does. And my mother called me after about a year and said, it's amazing because since you've moved to London, your Farsi has become much better. Because I was one of these Americanized kids who spoke half Ingilisi, Pingilisi, mixed up language in Iran since I was a kid, much to my parents' frustration.
When you started BBC Persian on radio, what surprised you the most with this new official job in Farsi as a broadcaster? Do you remember what it was that was new for you?
Becoming part of the story, like putting your name and your face out there, was something that I wasn't prepared for. And I started in radio, so I had about a day or two to decide to go on air and present something. And suddenly I was like, whoa, wait a second, this is going to have repercussions. I'm going on air. This means I'm exposing, I don't know, a part of me that I hadn't thought of that until then. Mm-hmm. That's pretty much it, because the rest of the work is really the same kind of work. I was covering Iran. In Iran, I was covering Iran. In London, I was covering Iran most of the time, but I did a lot of international news as well.
You go from radio to TV famously, and I'm going to ask you about that. But do you have a preference between radio and TV?
Radio is my first love.
Yes, and why?
Yeah.
Why is that for you?
I think it's more genuine. It's more yourself. It's more one-to-one, personal. I'm not really keen about putting makeup on and having my hair done every day and dressing up like 10 years older than I really want to look like, and sort of sitting there prim and proper, having a smile on my face at 5 a.m. or 3 a.m. or whatever ungodly hour it is. And one of the nicest things, one of my editors said to me when I got the TV presenting job, I'd actually applied for reporter and they chose me as a lead presenter. And the director of that team said, you didn't apply for presenter. Why? I said, I'm not really keen on being like the face in front, and said, don't ever say that to anyone else again, because all TV presenters love to see themselves on TV. You should too. Get working on that bit.
It's something
by the way, I still cringe at seeing or hearing myself afterwards. I never listen to any of the programs I do afterwards.
Oh, really?
Or if I do,
even when you do like a documentary or something, you won't watch it afterwards?
I watch it before it goes on air just to make sure there are no terrible mistakes in it. But I don't watch it afterwards, or I don't like listening to my own voice, which is weird because it's probably
it is weird because you have a very recognizable voice.
Thank you.
We have team members. When I was doing the research and listening to various interviews that you've done and work you've done over the years, people would walk by the office and go, oh, is that Pooneh? Like they could recognize you from your voice right away. So it's clearly very recognizable.
That's really nice. I was once in a taxi in Afghanistan, and I said the directions, and the driver in high speed suddenly turned back and said, "Oh, I know you. Hi. Oh, it's you." And I was like, "Yes, thank you. I love you, but please keep your eye on the road."
I've had that driver. I think he moved to Toronto. He's the same guy who turns around every time. Now, it's interesting because this, just to meditate on the question of radio and TV for a second, it's been a struggle a little bit with Roqe for me, because from the time we launched this thing, people have been saying, put up video, you guys should do video, and because of the pandemic, it was like, well, we should really start with audio because we can't have people in the studio. Not a lot of people are traveling to and from Toronto and all of that. But then Zoom started, and every network in the world is using Zoom, and it's easy, and so why aren't we using Zoom? And the reason is because I really believe with long form interviews, I mean, now we're sort of kowtowing to it and doing it and putting up some Roqe moments, but I really think, especially with a long form interview, when it's audio, there is a focus that the listener has that is just more intense, maybe more innocent and more profound than when you combine it with visuals. I mean, and I've felt, because I've done both TV and radio, and I remember doing what I thought were great reports on TV or a great broadcast, events or something on TV, and then the comments and the letters coming in all being, where did he get his jacket? What's up with the hair? I thought it was interesting when he looked at it. You just kind of go.
I did the most intense programs, like about qisas. I don't know if you know what qisas is, but qisas is a part of Islamic Sharia law, which means if someone kills your son, you go kill their son, or do equal eye for an eye kind of a punishment. And one of the probably most heavy duty programs I ever hosted was interviewing a woman in Iran who had had acid thrown on her face. And for 7 or 8 years, she had been fighting to get the boy who was imprisoned punished in the same equal way. And at some point, the courts judged that, yes, she can go to the prison or get a doctor to go to the prison and drip acid into the boy's eyes and blind him equally. And she was very pleased with that result. And she came on air to defend her decision to go do this in the next few days. And this was a call-in program, and a lot of people from all around the country called in, either begging her not to do it because they said it's inhumane, it's, what's the point in revenge? A lot of people called in and said, yes, you go, girl, well done, go do this, good for you, you deserve this revenge. The mother of the son who had been in prison for 8 years already called and started screaming and wailing on air, begging the girl not to do this. I was all choked up. I could barely hold the conversation with like 50 people coming and going into the show. And it was a very tense and nervous and difficult program to host because it was quite sad. There was a lot of very emotional, impactful moments in it. And it was a 55-minute show. Just imagine that.
Yes.
With about 20 callers coming and going and text messages and tweets and everything. So finish hosting the show, come off air, my shoulders are like tense like this, and I still have this lump in my throat. I come off air, my colleagues say this has been one of our most successful shows. There've been 2,000 emails and messages coming in while you've been on air. Go and check them out. I go sit at my desk, pour myself a tea, click randomly on one of those emails, and it says, Pooneh Khanum, you look really nice in that pink sweater. Please don't wear gray anymore. Wear pink always.
Right.
And, I just wanted to bang my head to my desk and my desktop right there and go, everyone's been ripping their throats for the past hour. And This is really all you pick up your laptop or phone and that's all you have to tell us. Working in radio, for me, the beauty of it is you have to be a better journalist because you have to explain the picture and make the people see that scene by your descriptions, because they cannot see when you say I'm standing at this crossroad and people are passing and the sun is at this angle and there's a smell of dust in the air and that kind of thing. When you're on TV, you're just standing there at some crossroad and people can see what's happening. So you just say what the actual bloody story is. And I think you have to be much more of an artist with words and with emotions and with storytelling in order to make radio come to life.
Well, there's something else too, which is that when you're in print, as you were in your early years, or when you're in radio, no matter how popular you are, you're still relatively anonymous. You know,
Yes.
when you're out and about. You end up moving from BBC Persian Radio to BBC Persian TV quite famously. And by the time you have your popular show Nobat Shoma on BBC Persian, you've become very well known in Iran. By the way, I've been told that of all the Iranians in the diaspora that are celebrities back in Iran, it's often the anchors and broadcasters on the big networks, because that's sort of the big show in terms of what people can get with satellite, etc. How was that for you, becoming this... because now that's different from just being a journalist and going into the media. Now you've become very well known back in your home country on BBC television.
Yes, it had a variety of kinds of repercussions for me personally, professionally, and for my family and people close to me. Part of it is the typical thing of, you're a bit more well known. Luckily, walking on the streets of London, few people would recognize me because of watching Persian TV. Luckily, I didn't walk on the streets of Tehran at that time. I don't know, to be honest, I don't know how many people would recognize me or whether it would be more pleasant or less. But it became more and more difficult to work as a journalist because the focus of the apparatus in Iran on you becomes much stronger. They start feeling the threat of this broadcasting corporation getting into people's hearts and minds a lot more. And it sort of scares them. And they start bothering you a lot more for it. And not just harassing me or, putting up stories or fake news or trolling or death threats or jokey threats or whatever. But a lot of people who weren't prepared or didn't sign up for this the way I did, including my parents, my brother, my closer relatives and friends, got sort of entangled in that in a way that I would have really not wanted for them to, and they hadn't really decided it. I'm really, really extremely lucky that everyone was supportive and appreciative of what I did. I kept asking people around me, are you sure this is not too much of a hassle for you? Are you sure you're happy for me to go on air tomorrow, continue doing this? They knew that I loved my job and they had my back, because otherwise it would be difficult. I'm sure not just me, but all of the journalists who work on Iran stories, whether they're in Iran or outside of Iran, I'm sure you've heard dozens of stories of arrests or harassment or people having to leave Iran with nothing through the border, walking.
Of course.
I haven't been terribly harmed as many of those have, but I've had my fair share.
I wasn't going to go here just yet, but let me go here since we're talking about it. I mean, just to put a fine point on it, it's no secret that there are pressures working for BBC Persian. I mean, it's really almost quite unique in the media landscape, even in the polarized media landscape of today's world, because with BBC Persian, and Iranians will understand what I'm saying this, even if they hate that I'm interviewing you or they love you or whatever it is, that you kind of, with BBC Persian, take it from all sides. At least that's the my observation. I mean, regularly seems like no one in the broader Iranian debate is happy with BBC Persian. You're either being attacked by the regime or you're being considered part of the regime. And so
I always say, sorry to jump in, but I always say, just think for a moment. If we are part of the regime or servicing the regime, as many may think we are, then why do you think we haven't been able to go back to the country or see our parents, or our parents and relatives have been harassed and arrested in Iran? And, why do you think there's been so much trouble for us? If they love us this much, if we are collaborators, we should be able to go have a much more easy life than we have.
It's got to wear you down, though. Without that, I mean, just the constant parade of criticism from all corners. How do you deal with that, or how did you deal with that?
Well, some of it is so pathetic and comedic sometimes that it's really easy to rub it off, like water off a wet duck's back. For example, my parents were jogging in a park one day, some years ago. There is this temporary exhibition in some corner of a park called like espionage or treachery and treason exhibition. And as they're jogging, they see a full-size cardboard cut-up of me. They just run past it and they go, wait a second, was that my daughter? It's a cardboard full-size cut-up of me and other treacherous, treasonous journalists who work for evil foreign media. Those bits are jokey enough. Maybe, I'm sure it does give shivers down anybody's spine. Or when they made up stories about my boss at BBC Persian attacking me, raping me, then discarding me for a new lover, and that's why I've been eliminated from my top presenter job. They're so pathetic and sometimes tragicomic that you sort of think no idiot would believe this, and people will hopefully be smart enough to just shrug and laugh at it. But at the same time, yes, you do realize I am doing something that is tickling somewhere in some people that is making them do this. And I think that in itself is kind of satisfying. As Oscar Wilde says, there's only one thing worse than being talked about, and that is not being talked about.
Right.
So I think as long as people are angry from both sides, or expect more from you from both sides, or have comments about what you should do more of or less of, it means they're watching. It means they're interested.
There's something else that's very interesting about being a broadcaster outside of Iran, broadcasting back to Iran. And I want to ask you this as a broadcaster. I mean, it's still so fascinating to me, the plight of an Iranian broadcaster outside of Iran, because you are mostly broadcasting to an audience. And I've talked to, Kambis Hosseini or Fardad Farahzad about this.
All my buddies.
All your buddies about this, but because it's endlessly interesting to me. You are mostly broadcasting to an audience that you're not going to see in person or even have any access to.
Hopefully I am one day.
Well, okay.
I'm not
okay, one day. But I mean, the part of the idea is, I'm going to broadcast to the people across the street. So let me go visit with the people across the street so I can build a sense of community with them. I mean, when you have that barrier that you're excommunicated from and pulled away from the people who are actually the ones watching you, it's such an interesting paradox and such an interesting
anyone
obstacle.
Anyone who gets in touch with you or calls you or gives you an interview, you know that they're going to get into trouble. They know that they're probably going to get into trouble. And, forget about officials, non-officials, when they pick up the phone and they decide to call the BBC and be a citizen journalist and talk to you, they know the risks they're taking, especially at heightened times of crisis when there's protests or when there's demonstrations happening in the country. And you really have to respect that, because I'm sitting in my safe home in London. Well, I did have a couple of threats or a couple of stalkers following me. I had security at the BBC heightened around me for a while, but that's really nothing compared to people who pick up the phone and call the BBC, and when they hang up, someone from the Iranian apparatus calls them immediately and says, I know you just called them, don't you ever do that, or come show up for a questioning tomorrow.
Wow.
You have to respect that. So I can't complain in comparison with people who risk a lot more doing what they do.
You end up anchoring at BBC World then in English. And I was thinking about that because I was thinking that audience is likely exponentially larger than the BBC Persian audience. I mean, probably in the millions more. But I'm assuming
about 450 million.
Okay. Oh, well, there you go. Yeah. But I'm assuming that it would have been. And by the way, you're great in English. I mean, it's even silly to say it because you're a natural.
I'm known as the person with the weird, dodgy accent you can't place where she's from.
That's right. But I'm assuming that it was less hassle to be broadcasting to 10 times more people, right? Just because you don't have to deal with all the inner politics of and cultural issues and issues with the regime and all of that by working in Farsi?
Absolutely. It was quite lovely arriving in the airport in the States or in Nigeria or in Nepal or in Hong Kong and being welcomed by passport people, by police, by people who just come to pick you up because they recognize you as a BBC person and they respect you immediately because they think, oh, these are the good guys. They're doing something right, rather than feeling like you're targeted for what you're doing all the time. And that's quite lovely. When you go to conferences around the world and you speak and you realize what kind of a reputation and trust the BBC still enjoys globally, in Afghanistan, in Pakistan, in the Middle East, in Europe, in Africa, in Asia, it sort of just makes you feel a lot more proud. Because when you get bogged down in one region, which you are personally involved with, your family, your life, your background is very much intertwined with, it's very easy to forget all of that, the proportions of it.
You know, one of the things that really is clear about you and the work you've done at BBC World, the work you continue to do as a journalist, and I guess even before you were at BBC, is not being shy about going to the hot spots. You alluded to earlier being arrested in various countries. You've clearly been all over the world. And I want to go back to now that question. I said I wanted to come back to it. I did flag it in my mind, that question your dad asked you when he was at the BAM earthquake and he's thinking about his 18-year-old daughter 13 years earlier on the earthquake scene and thinking, how did you even get through this? How do you, Pooneh, cover Iran or other difficult places and stories around the world without letting it affect your psyche? I mean, as a journalist on the front lines covering everything from earthquakes to executions, what is your prescription for staying sane?
I don't want to sound preachy. It's not easy and it's not done just like this. I've lost too many very close friends along the way to speak in a blasé kind of a way. Some of the top journalists who've lost their lives in the past decade have been my close friends, Daniel Pearl, Marie Colvin, Kaveh Golestan being a few of them. It always affects you, it impacts you, it's very unhealthy. If you're good and if the organization you work for is good, you have to go through professional help a lot of times, or take a break for a while, but always keeping in mind the reason you're doing this and the effect and impact it's going to have on the people really helps for me. Having a perspective of how important what you're doing is and who it really actually helps and whether it really educates one single person at a time or helps one single person at a time ask a difficult question from themselves is just really beautiful and rewarding. I heard your interview with Kambiz the other day, and I loved I think it was the last answer he gave of like, his best feeling was just when someone calls him and says, for example, I didn't commit suicide because I listened to your program.
Yeah.
And these are those individual bits of impact and effect that you have. And we don't want to fool ourselves. We don't want to think like we're changing the world overnight. Nobody is. But for example, one of the most sweet compliments I ever got when I was at BBC Persian was a professor at Tehran University who came to London for an event, took me aside at a conference and said, I have a classroom, we have debates on political science. And in the middle of an argument or fight among 10 students, supervised by me in this class, one of the students suddenly said, wait a second, let's debate the Nobat Shoma kind of a way, in a civil way, like respectful way, without shouting or being rude to each other. And do you realize this is the impact that Nobat Shoma has had on at least that class of, 18, 19-year-old students in Tehran? And I thought that's lovely that a professor notices that the level of civility in debate has changed in a conversation. That's pure gold for me.
Do you feel like you have a thick skin? I mean, like a like
I call myself a rhinoceros.
Well, so like I was thinking about nurses or aid workers or defense
Absolutely.
lawyers, people who've seen it all, who kind of go, who don't, I mean, if you see something, you're in Afghanistan or Syria or whatever, you don't even have to be there. You could be in inner city of North America. Is it that you don't break down at the end of the night and you used to? I mean, how would you express that, how that thick skin manifests?
Yes, it is difficult. It is uncomfortable. It is sad. And yes, you definitely develop a tougher skin. The kinds of TV shows and Hollywood films I watch very comfortably until midnight and then turn the TV off and go to bed, which would make a lot of people lose sleep, are quite disconcerting sometimes. Whenever I suggest to my friends, you should watch this TV series or this program, they always say, wait a second, her standards and gore and are very different from us.
What about political objectivity? And not, I don't mean are you pro-regime or not, or Iran, because we can go on forever with that. But there is a pressure on Iranians covering Iran to speak out just because of atrocities, planes being shot down, human rights violations. I'm reminded of it's something that documentary filmmakers always face. We had we were covering the documentary Sonita about the young female rapper who was in Iran and Afghanistan, and the documentary maker is following her, and there's this moment where this teenager who's a great rapper and has her whole life ahead of her is going to get sold off to be married unless the documentary maker hands over $2,000 and can take her. And there's that moral and ethical and broadcasting question of, well, do I give the $2,000, or as a documentarian, do I say that's not my gig? I'm here to just show the reality. How have you learned to walk that line?
I'm a strong believer, and I know a lot of you guys, including you and Combis in your conversation a few days ago, think this makes journalism bland or boring or toothless sometimes. But I must say, I'm an advocate for keeping your distance, keeping your opinions to yourself on air and off air if you're a public personality, in order to allow the people to not be affected by your opinions directly. Some of my friends are strong campaigners for whatever cause. I don't sign any petitions because I think it's not my part to have my signature. It's not my place to have my signature under anything, because then I won't be able to fairly interrogate that cause or interview or ask questions from whoever is pro or against that cause.
Gotcha. So you wouldn't tweet, "Don't execute Navid Afkari"?
I would.
You would?
There are some things, if I wouldn't necessarily about, for example, Navid Afkari, but there are some things that you have to take sides on.
Like what?
Homophobia, for example, slavery. There are some things that are in the UN Convention. They are facts, and racism is wrong. Homophobia is wrong. Killing people, massacre, genocide is wrong.
Gotcha.
I have many personal friends who are in prison right now in Iran or other countries. I personally have my opinions about whether they're innocent or guilty, whether they deserve to be in prison or not. But I cannot claim that I can make judicial rulings on anything. And I know the judiciaries of what countries I trust and what countries don't count for a penny.
Right.
Their judicial systems. I'm well aware of that. But I'm not going to dismiss anyone's innocence or anyone's proof of innocence without being 100% sure. I'm going to campaign for fair trials and people who are innocent to be freed. But I'm not going to be sure which ones of these people you're probably going to name or hashtag in a line for me are among those and which are not. And if I became a campaigner, free this person, free that person, don't do this, don't do that, then I've lost my place as a middleman, as a middle person who's supposed to be that wall in the squash game. not the tennis player.
By the way, but you threw me and Combees in the same boat there. If I talk about a bland broadcast or a beige or vanilla or whatever it is, I'm not necessarily suggesting that. I actually agree with you about opinions when it comes to especially anchors. You know, I think that there has to be, at the very least, the postulate of objectivity. Nobody is completely objective. We all know that. But
some of them do become too vanilla and too bland. I agree with you.
That's what I'm talking about, yeah.
Charm and the skill of the presenter and the producer and the program making to not make it dull. You don't have to shout at people and dismiss people or condemn people to be interesting. Now, I mentioned in the introduction that you are someone who is in the unique position to have been world-class, who is world-class as an anchor in both Farsi and in English. So you can, I figure, shed some insights into this that very few could. How is it different presenting in English to an English audience versus a Persian one? In other words, is it the same rules? Are you the same person? Do you do the same things, really? Or do you feel like you have to speak slightly in a different way, or cheat your body in a different way, or explain things slower or faster? Talk to me about that. Interesting question. I don't think I've ever quite evaluated that in my own head. I don't have different personas for different programs, that's for sure. But I do remember when I was on Persian programs, I felt, because I'm not a very conservative person, I'm maybe more westernized than half of the Iranian or Afghan or Tajik audience would maybe appreciate or like a TV face to be. I always felt that I have to be more well-behaved and more ladylike and maybe a little bit more demure in the way I dress, for example, when I'm on Persian TV, because the audience is not used to it as such. But at the same time, I was very adamant and very sneakily keen to push those boundaries centimeter by centimeter and word by word, and not fall for that conservative mentality of, you know, your older uncle would not approve of this, or the older gentleman in Afghanistan who's more religious than you are would not approve of the way you're dressing or the way you're speaking. This is the BBC. It is not Iranian state TV. So there has to be a standard of difference. And this is a European Western mindset and institution. So I'm not going to look like Islamic TV does, or Afghan TV or Persian state TV does. But at the same time, you have to respect sensitivities to some extent, while constantly trying to push them and open them up to the extent that you can. I felt I was a lot more comfortable wearing what I wanted or joking about things as I wanted when I had 400 million more audience.
It's ironic, isn't it? Yeah.
It's weird to say this. I don't think I've ever said this before, but you know, there are a lot of Iranian restaurants in Toronto as well. If I ever go to an Iranian restaurant with my group of friends or my family in London, I always feel that I have to be a little bit more aware of my behavior than if I go to another restaurant where I don't feel I may be as much recognizable.
Where you're a drunken sot.
Yeah, let's go.
Listen, you do still do lots of broadcasting, but you are now primarily
I do occasionally broadcasting now.
Sure, yes. Yeah. But you've got this gig on global partnerships, business representing BBC. That is a different kind of front line from covering a war or anchoring on air during a crisis. Do you I mean, the obvious question, do you miss the adrenaline of being on the air?
Not yet, but a lot of people, even at work, they ask me, you were a presenter. What are you doing in business development team now? I need change and I need new challenges and I need new adventures all the time. And in the past 20 years, I've maybe worked in 10, 15 different departments at the BBC: English, language services, training, social media, editorial, projects, different English programs, different Farsi programs. And there came a point about 2-3 years ago when I thought, I need a new field of interest and I need to learn something. Sort of maybe plateaued, or maybe become a little bit been there, done that with producing, presenting, editing, hosting shows, going to dangerous places.
Sure.
maybe I grew up a little bit or matured a little bit as well. But the adrenaline wasn't quite doing it for me. And I think I just wanted to find out. And also, to be honest, the media world is heading in that direction where you really want to find out how can it sustain itself in this world of social media. Everyone's calling us now legacy media, which seems a bit offensive. I feel like a dinosaur when somebody says that to me. It's sort of, you have to keep this place, you have to sustain and survive as an institution. So what my team does is try to bring external funding into the BBC, make partnerships with other organizations to continue in the path of making the same programs that we are trying to make. If we had all the budget in the world, we would have loved to make anyway, as in they fit our editorial framework anyway. Right. So it's quite thrilling. It's not boring or dull. I'm not sitting behind a desk doing office work all the time.
How do you feel about social media?
I love it and loathe it. No, I don't loathe it as much as everybody thinks it's toxic or poisonous. I think it could be used in much wiser, cleverer, more useful ways, rather than just, doing Kim Kardashian video mimes. I think everything has its place, but this is such a gigantic endeavor and such a gigantic advent in the world that we could have made so much better use of.
You see, if somebody could snap their fingers and get rid of social media never existed, most days I think that would be a good thing. I mean, I think
it's super democratizing.
Well, that's the part I love. That's the part I love. That people, that it has given voice to people who wouldn't have a voice elsewhere. Starting from the Green Movement. I mean, that's where in 2009
Absolutely.
in Iran. But that said, you put it on on the scale with the kind of damage it does. I'm not sure. I'm not sure if I think.
I'm sure that the positive weight is heavier than the other side still. And I know you're a rock dude.
I'm
you're
a rock dude.
Music buff as much as I am. There was an interview, I think in the 80s, with David Bowie.
90s.
Early 90s.
When he predicted
when
the
he was
internet.
talking about internet coming and social media coming and how it's going to change the world.
Yeah.
And Jeremy Paxman, whom I worked with, I was on Newsnight for about a year, he was one of the best presenters on the BBC ever, one of the biggest faces. And he was saying, come on, it's a fad. It's not going to take up, is it? He was just so dismissive. I'm embarrassed to remember it. And David Bowie was just saying, do you realize the power it's going to have, the changes it's going to create? And I think that kind of vision, if everybody had that, or at least a few more people had that, to understand the power and the weight and the positivity that it can bring in educating people, in saving people's lives, in entertaining and informing people, I'm a huge advocate for it. And the cat videos and Kim Kardashian videos can have their own fair share. I'm all for that.
You have forever won my heart by referencing a Bowie comment. But I think what he said, the amazing part of what he said was, he said, we have no idea where this is going, but it's going to change the way people think. That, and he was right. He was the only, one of these people saying that. What about
He's a clairvoyant there.
Genius.
He's a savant, yeah.
I can't keep you forever. This has been amazing. I'm asking you questions out of my own curiosity
pleasure.
at this point. But before I let you go, what about the diaspora itself? How do you, just from your standpoint, if I've spoken to this stat a number of times on this show, but at 9/11 there were 2 million Iranians, or almost 2 million Iranians, living outside of Iran around the world. At this stage, only 20 years later, that could have quadrupled. I mean, it's somewhere between 7 and 10 million. How do you see the Iranian identity evolving now that millions of us are living outside of Iran?
Again, it's a bit like the social media question you were asking me. for me, it's a bit like, if only we could make better use of it, come together and do better. God, what we could do with it. My partner, my boyfriend, is British. We've been together for 11 years. And I am so flattered and I'm so pleased that time and time again, dozens of times in the past decade, when we've come back from a dinner party or an art gallery or an event, he just says, "Oh my God, these Iranian people were so impressive. Your people are so educated. That guy I was talking to at that party was just mind-blowingly sharp, accomplished, interesting, humble, lovely." And I'm an Iranian, so I can't keep saying, "Oh, look how wonderful we are. We're the best in the world. Iranian this, Iranian that, Persians this." I know you have a chunk in your program,
Yes.
Iranians invented this and that, which is true. He always jokes about that with me as well. But I think there's this amazing number of amazing people scattered around the world doing amazing things. The talent that Iran could have taken advantage of and isn't is dramatic, is really upsetting. But at the same time, if we only came together in a little bit more solidarity and a little bit more kind heart and a pinch of salt of acceptance and tolerance towards each other, we could do such amazing things. And it shames me sometimes that we are sometimes so, I don't know, unfriendly towards each other, competing rather than coming together, always very quick to dismiss an opinion rather than saying, well, they're doing the best they can. Let me do the best I can as well. I wish we could be a little bit more like that.
It's very
Sorry, I'm becoming preachy again. I feel really old when you ask me these questions.
Really, the age related. When I how do you see the Iranian? Well, I mean, you've seen things. So, you know, you're not 15. You're a few years older.
I'm almost 50.
Well, join the club, sister. It's been an absolute pleasure. It is. I really appreciate the amount of time.
I'm humbled.
I thank you. Please tell me more about how you're humbled. I want to hear.
I'm just warming up, man.
It's been a joy, and I thank you for the work you've done, and for taking the time to talk to us. And I suspect, I mean, if I were to guess, I think you're going to be back on the air. I don't think you can keep a good person down, and that's.
I occasionally sneak away from my office and present a documentary.
I know you do.
Do a program.
I know you do. I know you do.
I
we'll
do.
see more. I hope to see you before too long. Thank you for this.
My pleasure. Thank you. Lovely talking to you.
Khodafis.
Bye-bye.
Pooneh Ghoddoosi is a world-renowned television anchor, radio presenter, output editor, senior producer who has worked with a variety of news, current affairs, features, and interactive programs for the BBC. She is currently the Business Development Manager for Global Partnerships at the BBC World Service. And Pooneh Ghoddoosi joined me from London, England today. Microphones back on for Captain Reza, Groovy Shaya, and the fabulous Kyan. Pooneh Ghoddoosi, I very much enjoyed that. There's so many things that she said in there that are sticking with me. The metaphors of the squash court rather than the tennis game, when she's talking about interviewing and broadcasting. Her talk about her dad. That was quite moving. Her dad calling her and saying, that thing you did at 18, going and covering that earthquake, how did you possibly do that? Lots of interesting. Go ahead.
I was just going to say, it's just funny how destiny works sometimes. Like she just happened to be at the right place at the right time when, you know, her path completely changed into a whole new world of broadcasting. Mm-hmm. She wasn't planning on entering it, as far as I know, right? So it just...
she always liked telling stories. That's clear, and it was something she, I guess, had learned she had a facility for. But yeah, no, it's true. I mean, the other thing is being going to U of T in Toronto, and then her friend applying for BBC Persian. Getting the job, that changes the course of her life forever. I mean, it's very interesting. Groovy Shaya?
Yeah, I was a big fan of Pooneh. I mean, I could say she was the reason that I watched BBC Persian in Nobat Shoma. And she was really powerful on the show, and I like her voice also. It's very unique and iconic.
She called her English accent indeterminate, like you can't tell where she's from with her when she's speaking in English. It's true, and it almost at times she sounded a bit Irish, and then I mean she doesn't have the traditional Persian kind of accent.
Right.
Like me.
You sound Irish.
Also, she also has. Her throat is more lubricated, like in general. She doesn't have to.
I'm gonna get Shai one of my big water bottles.
See, I don't understand. Shai, is there nothing? Maybe some hot water or something would help you.
But really, I'm getting older and older in your
impression. Like by every episode, it gets like 5 years older at least.
We could put that. That's my savvy Roham. We could put that on the clubhouse. Captain Reza, did that interview wake you up at all?
It did wake me up.
And you were falling asleep earlier in the show while we were recording. Nothing like the director of the show. I mean, I'm never going to forget this.
No.
Yeah. What was? Where do you consider home? Yeah, I guess Canada is a place that I
wake up.
It's like
he
Reza,
lays
what is?
back.
Where do you do? Yeah, he wasn't even near the microphone.
Usually, like, do you want a cigarette?
I find Toronto is a good place.
I swear it was the Tachin. It put me to sleep.
And like Pooneh Ghoddoosi is waiting in London, like let's listen in, and it's just like, what is this clown show? I guess Canada is. All right. So all right.
But
so
it actually invoked a question in my head, because I always wondered about observation versus participation, especially when it comes to investigative filmmaking, documentary making, or journalism, right? And when she was talking about during the earthquake of BAM, a lot of these journalists and press people were standing around taking photos and stuff, while if you were helping out and trying to get rubbles off of bodies and stuff like that, it actually made me think. I'm like, yeah, and at what point would you where would you draw the line? Because I remember there was a very controversial photo of a carcass flying around in Africa, waiting for a baby a human baby to die, so that it can eat it essentially. And there was a photographer who took a photo of it, got very emotional, and cried and talked about it for a very long time. And my question was always, why don't you go help that baby instead of crying and taking a photo of it? But maybe that's not his job. So it was very thought-provoking when she said that.
You've made documentaries before. What's your policy?
That's a very good question, and I've done investigative documentaries, but it's always been so far has been into the underworld of crime and stuff like that, and even getting involved. Getting involved was never an option, and it's not necessary. It's always about being an unbiased observer. So I've always played that role.
I used the example of Sanita during the interview because it's a very simple one. Where you're doing a documentary on a young girl, a young woman. I guess she was a girl at the time. She's 14 years old. And there comes a point when she's talented, she's smart, she's a rapper, and you know that she can make something of her life if she comes to the West. And there comes a moment where her family from a village in Afghanistan says, no, we want to take her and sell her off to be married. And unless you give us $2,000, then you can, emancipate her or whatever. So the filmmaker in that case ends up giving the $2,000, which is not officially what the documentarian should do, in terms of staying, not interfering in the subject matter. But what would you do in that case?
I would do the same.
Yeah.
I would do the same. And I would do the same.
Do you remember the old? I don't know if they were in reruns when I was a kid. But if you've ever watched reruns of the old Star Trek, the first Star Trek series with Kirk and Spock.
Yeah, of course.
I've seen bits of it, but I haven't seen.
They had a concept called the Prime Directive, and the Prime Directive is that when you're going down to any planet, especially if you're time traveling into the past, you can't do anything that changes the course of history because you are then affecting the world, the lives. So you can't fall in love with someone or save someone if they're about to die or something. The Prime Directive is you never interfere. And it reminds me of that. It's kind of a question around what you do as a journalist. But it's also, you're absolutely right. I mean, how can you stand by idly sometimes when All right, listen, it's Thursday, and you know what that means. She's a dear friend, a diaspora blend, a gym workout cat, a bicultural brat, but lovable, smart, funny, on a journey to discover what we actually discovered. Here we go, Bachaha. It's All Persian to us with Kyan Nademi.
He's awake now.
He wakes up for that. First thing he's woken up for. All right, Kyan, what do we have in the It's All Persian to Us file today?
Well, it's no secret that we come from a culture that admires things of great beauty, such as BMWs, Mercedes-Benz, Louis Vuitton, Chanel. No, I'm kidding, of course. Well, kind of, No, we come from a culture that has deep-rooted appreciation and understanding of nature's beauty, tabiat, as we Persians like to call it.
Yes.
It plays a role throughout our culture, traditions, art. Just read a few poems by Rumi and you'll know what I'm talking about. So it only makes sense that ancient Persians made this form of art more mainstream. It's outdoors and it's art in nature.
Walking.
Gardening. Yes, gardening. And yes, it's a form of art. Yes, believe it or not, this is something that the Persians popularized, cultivating gardens for aesthetic purposes. Yes. Before that, gardens were purely used for growing food or farming. Leave it to the Persians, basically, to turn anything into a form of luxury. It's in our blood. We can't help it.
Yeah, that's true.
So gardens and green spaces in general have always played a significant role in Persian history and culture. It's part of who we are. This originated as early as 4000 BC, but the clear tradition of it began during the Achaemenid dynasty, around 6th century BC, when the oldest Persian garden of record was built for none other than Cyrus the Great, in his ancient capital of Pasargad, where the outline of the garden still remains visible even to this day. Did you know this, Raza? You're from Shiraz.
I'm from Shiraz.
So this royal garden is of particular note because it was the first form of Chahar Bagh, translated to fourfold garden, an aesthetically geometrical and symmetrical pattern which became synonymous with Persian gardening. And so this meant that gardens were carefully designed and intentionally divided into 4 sections with 4 major elements within it. So the Persian garden itself was first conceived to symbolize the Garden of Eden, and this is from the Zoroastrian religion. So naturally, the 4 elements of sky, earth, water, and plants played a major role both practically and aesthetically. And so this naturally unsuitable environmental conditions of Persia required strategic and creative artificial engineering involving these elements. It's generally a pretty dry land there, so they had to get creative with the space. So water sources, for example, were quite scarce in these regions. So creating a complex irrigation system from underground water channels connecting springs and rivers were key to keep the vegetation nourished. So they actually put work into this. Speaking of water, this element played a central role. So a large fountain or a pond, for example, was usually placed in the middle of the garden, like playing a central role of essentially the Persian garden. Right. And large trees were strategically placed for areas of shading against the sun. And a variety of carefully chosen trees, herbs, flowers with surrounding walls around the garden, creating an enclosure essentially. So they created a little space with an enclosure around it.
So they would put trees around, like strategically
Yes,
placed in the places where
strategically.
they wanted shades.
Exactly, and making it an art form. They kind of, picked and choose the colors and everything. They put a lot of time and effort into this, man. So, so this garden concept had philosophical purposes. So the axis of symmetry was of the utmost importance in Persian culture. It's a part of the process and a part of, the culture. And by the way, these gardens were called pardis in Persian, which is where the English word of paradise representing heaven comes from. And so when Alexander the Great occupied Persia in 334 BC, he adopted this idea of a paradise garden, which was then spread across Greece, then Rome, and soon the world. To this day, evidence of Persian influence can be seen from the Alhambra in Spain, to the Taj Mahal and the Mongolian garden in India, to the paved and tiled Andalusian courtyards. And so what was once done for practical and survival reasons soon became a symbol of ethereal beauty, the art of gardening. Because, well, you guessed it, it's all Persian to us.
Nice. So we invented two things, gardening and the word paradise. Basically.
Pretty much, yeah. Well,
Nice.
before that, gardens naturally occurred. It was part of nature, obviously. But Persians made it a form of art. They actually made it something that took up time and, part of their culture.
Did we invent the irrigation system?
Yes, we did.
We
I
did,
was going
right?
to get to that soon, Jian.
Okay, yeah.
That
I mean,
was
you just
coming
threw it
up.
in there, and I was like, well, that's important.
I was going to
okay,
tie
well,
it.
And this
Yeah.
nobody's
So-
listening. We can, don't worry.
So actually from this is how the Greeks and the Romans, they took this up themselves and they created gardens within their own spaces. So then it became a thing of the elites where they would create gardens next to their, homes, and they would spend a lot of time in there contemplating life and coming up with ideas. So
I like
Yeah.
how we invented it's like yes, you can have lots of food from your garden, but look at mine, so pretty, so beautiful, not like yours.
yeah, oh, look at that. Do
Yeah.
you garden? Does anybody
I
garden
garden.
here? You do.
You've been in my backyard.
Oh, I thought you hired someone to do that.
So did I.
She
actually,
never.
to be honest.
She's always like this, It's like when I cook, she's like, "Oh, you cook?" Like I've literally fed her.
I thought you
know?
have people doing that for
Yeah, I
you.
have lots of people.
Who has time for gardening is my question.
Now, you know what, though? My mom is an amazing gardener.
Wow.
And she's famous for her balkha. Right?
Yeah, for her gardens.
Gardens.
Well, I mean, over the years, she's had more than
That's right.
Yeah.
She's got a landscaping company and everything as well.
So I just kind of, my mom will once in a while, do you ever have like your mom give you some plants or something that you can then,
They always die. I can't take care of plants. I can
but then
barely take care of myself.
you can plant them and then they'll grow in your neck of the
Yeah,
woods.
but then you just have to. They take time and effort. You have to actually, look over it like a child. I can't.
Why don't you have your people
Well, maybe
grow the plants for you?
Do you have some free time?
I like
on the
how
weekend?
you project onto me, like you're the one who has corn fat and drivers and
You all this time you spend at the
Butler.
studio. When do you find time to
Well,
garden?
actually, that's a good point. That's a good point. I don't have a lot of time to garden.
And
But I always love it, and I have plants all over my house. I have flowers in my house
So
that
it's
I buy for
therapeutic.
myself. Yeah, I like
a form
that.
of therapy, I
Because they look pretty. That is why.
And I just forgot to mention one thing. Fun fact, there's 9 gardens among Iran's United Nations World Heritage Sites. Did you guys know this?
No.
Okay, well now you know. That's
What
how
does that-
important
what does
gardens
that-
are
what does
to
that
us.
mean? What did you mean
It
by
means these gardens are preserved. They're part of the United Nations World Heritage Sites. Yeah,
Among
so
the
they're-
heritage sites, 9 of
Exactly.
them are gardens.
Yes, exactly. That's how important it is to our
You know what
culture.
they call those? Balkha.
Yes.
One more time for the cheap
Yeah,
seats.
yeah. Thank you very much, Kyan. We learned again, this time gardening is added to the list of things that Persians invented. It's all Persian to us. The fabulous Kyan, Groovy Shaya, Captain Reza. See you all on Monday. Thank you. Happy 1-year anniversary. I see you tomorrow. Clubhouse, 4 p.m. Eastern. This is Full Time for Roqe for today. Our website, roqemedia.com. The handiwork of Ponta the artist, who also joins us on Clubhouse. Roqemedia.com is your one-stop shop for all things Roqe, all of our episodes, our guests. Link to our patrons page there as well to support us. Thanks to the amazing team who put this show together. Ponte the artist, Thoughtful Nagin, producer Susan, the fabulous Kyan, Sabi Roham, Master Mohammed, Aghay Mehrdad, Captain Reza and Groovy Shai. A thank you to all of you out there supporting us and sharing our content. Please subscribe on any of our platforms or all of them if you've not done so already. And you can find me on Instagram at Jian Ghomeshi. In the meantime, as ever, we say to you, Mizun Washi.